Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, and here we are in the aftermath of Super Tuesday. Results not altogether unexpected, I would say, except for Nikki Haley winning the state of Vermont. Okay. Then it seems that she has indicated, her campaign anyway, that she's going to end her campaign. She's dropping out of the GOP presidential race after losing everything yesterday except for the state of Vermont. CBS News reporting that former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations under President Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, suspending her bid for the Republican presidential nomination, according to sources familiar with the matter. Haley is apparently going to be delivering some remarks to the press this morning at her campaign headquarters on Daniel Island in her home state of South Carolina. Sources with direct knowledge of Haley's planned remarks tell CBS News she will not endorse former President Donald Trump during her remarks. That doesn't really surprise me. Here's the next line. However, CBS News confirms that she will encourage Trump to, quote, earn the support of her Republican backers and independent voters who favored her during the GOP primary. I mean, it's not an endorsement, but it's not a not endorsement. It's not an intent to fight his ascendancy back into the office he took and abused and sought to hold illegally by inciting an insurrection. Two sources close to Haley say she is eager to remain part of the GOP conversation, is proud of being the last contender standing against Trump, and is not ruling out anything moving forward. I mean, does that mean a no-labels run? Her top allies believe her run cements her as the standard bearer for traditional Republican values. We talked about this, was it last week? Yeah, it was last week. I pointed out that there was of course it was funny because it was from The Daily Show, but there was this clip where the Daily Show's writers countered with the notion that Nikki Haley was somehow the moderate choice between Trump and Biden, like she was somehow Trump light or somehow an in-between the two ideologically, when she was actually further to the right on most issues than even Donald Trump. So, yeah, I guess she does cement her place as the standard bearer for traditional Republican values. Which really makes it all the more confounding how she did not perform better, even as the lone candidate remaining in the presidential primary against Donald Trump. I have surmised now for a couple of weeks that her being the last remaining candidate to take him on to seek the nomination of the Republican Party gave an opportunity for the never-Trumper types, the Lincoln Project Republican types, and I think a lot of them are just maybe moderate conservative Democrats, if there is such a thing. But I really half expected to see her perform better as the lone candidate, because all through the 2016 presidential cycle, you have to remember, go way back then, Donald Trump never crossed the 50% threshold so long as he had alternatives to him. He never secured 50% or more of any state's votes until it was just him and one candidate toward the end. At that time, the candidate was former Ohio Governor John Kasich. Can I also just tell you, I actually knew that Nikki Haley's campaign was over well before last night. Well before the weekend, actually.
CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett joins me now. Always a pleasure, Major. Okay, Nikki Haley's biggest donor, the Koch brothers, they are halting her campaign, saying they see no viable path. So, is this over?
It's over in the sense that former President Trump is on a clear and unobstructed path to claiming enough delegates to be the presumptive nominee by mid-March. But that's not because the Koch brothers and Americans for Prosperity are dropping their support of Nikki Haley, at least financially. Nikki Haley got support from them in late November, far too late to make a huge on-the-ground difference in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. But it was enough to at least identify those voters in the non-Trump Republican Party or Republican-adjacent part who were willing to participate to send a kind of protest vote on Nikki Haley's behalf. The absence of Americans for Prosperity going forward will give us a very clear indication of just how large, John, that anti-Trump vote within Republican primaries and caucuses actually is.
It turns out that number is statistically insignificant enough to have mattered. And for me, the thing is, she started only sharpening her attacks on the former president when she became the last person on the dais. It's so crazy to have watched these GOP primaries. Back in 2016, they were sort of sharp on the criticisms, and then when it became apparent he was going to be the nominee, just the bootlickery. I mean, just nonstop since, for the most part. Even in January 6th, in the aftermath of January 6th, there were a lot of, wringing my hands with this guy, and then by January 8th, they're all down at Mar-a-Lago kissing the ring. In the outset of this season of the GOP primary, it seemed that only Chris Christie was the one with the sharp attacks at Donald Trump, his record, his foibles, his shortcomings, personal, politically, and otherwise. Independent voters who may have had the opportunity to warm to a Nikki Haley presidential campaign were probably just waiting on her to pivot.
Like Don Hartnett.
I think she really needs to go after President Trump, former President Trump, more. Really a little more aggressively.
Yes, that. I mean, that was like a month ago. It seems like forever ago since the New Hampshire primary, right? But that was like more than a month ago, and by then it was really too late. See, I'm going to tell you something. I know this because I followed and was vigorously supporting the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016. And if there was any lesson to learn from that, it's that if you are not in a party, but you have a vested interest in the outcome of a party's presidential primary, well, you better make sure, whatever state you live in, that you are able to participate in that primary. And Nikki Haley's pivot to try and be more critical of the former president and all of his shortcomings, and there's a long list, it came too late. It just came too late to win over what I think is an opportunity for someone other than Donald Trump and other than Joe Biden to secure support to make a legitimate run at one of the party's nominations. I do not believe, especially at this late hour, that any candidacy, a third-party candidacy, is going to be effective unless the intent is to derail one or the other. But there is a large, what is it? I think it's Nikki Haley's own words. She said like 70, 80% of the country doesn't want either one of these men to be president. That's, last I checked, the majority of the American people. Now, as a matter of policy, she is nowhere between the two. In fact, as I pointed out before, and laughably, so did The Daily Show about a week and a half ago, she's actually, in most cases, more conservative than even Donald Trump, which just leaves you wondering, what happened to the Republican Party? Donald Trump happened to the Republican Party. He is essentially the Godzilla of, or you know what? I'll even go one step better. He is the T-Rex of Jurassic World. They have concocted this fantastic little conservative theme park with all of these facades of ideological principles that really don't mean squat. There's nothing behind them. Just like there's nothing behind him. He is not successful. He never really had been. NBC bailed him out of essentially being a failed businessman. 6 bankruptcies, 4 businesses bankrupted over the years. And they came to him because he had this celebrity status, this opulent facade, and they wanted that. And they used that for The Celebrity Apprentice, which rose his personal stock. And the next thing you know, a lot of Americans think, this guy's a boss. He is tough. He is no frills, takes no guff, and will fire you on the... I mean, literally just a facade of success until a few seasons later, we have enough folks who bought into it. But back to the Jurassic World analogy, he's the T-Rex that got out the cage. He's out, and it doesn't matter how many times they try to poke him or the electrocution sticks, or it doesn't matter. He's out, and they've lost control of the park, and folks should be abandoning the park, but for some reason, they're still buying the merch, and they're still cheering him on as he continues to devour everything in his sights. So while I could sit here and have an overarching conversation about what will the GOP look like after Donald Trump, you know, when he's made this run and doesn't win again, I don't know, or you know, whenever the Grim Reaper comes a calling, what happens to the GOP after Donald Trump? What sort of opportunities exist for someone as bad or worse? Or and again, we've seen this ideological swirling of the drain where it's about and his presence, his ability to seek rock bottom, to be that more the cruelty is the point kind of candidate, has electrified an ugly underbelly of the GOP. I played a good segment of Rachel Maddow 2 nights ago on MSNBC, just talking about all the ne'er-do-wells in the GOP. The sitting lieutenant governor of the state of North Carolina running for the gubernatorial nomination.
Here is the serving Republican lieutenant governor of North Carolina on Black Panther. He says it is, quote, created by an agnostic Jew and put to film by a satanic Marxist.
It's grief.
He calls it, quote, this trash that was only created to pull the shekels out of your Schwarze pockets.
Wow.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Republican lieutenant governor of North Carolina.
That's right.
Tomorrow on Super Tuesday, he's actually going to be running in the North Carolina primary to try to become his party's nominee for governor of the great state of North Carolina.
Spoiler alert, he won last night on Super Tuesday. So he's the GOP nominee for North Carolina's governor.
Here he is calling survivors of school gun massacres, quote, media prostitutes, as in prostitutes, but prostitutes. He calls them spoiled little bastards who need to shut up. Again, this is for kids who lived through a school shooting that killed 17 of their classmates. He calls public school teachers, quote, wicked people. Wow. And not for nothing, he says this about the Holocaust. He says, quote, Hitler disarming millions of Jews and then marching them off to concentration camps is a bunch of hogwash.
Oh, my God. And he is now the GOP nominee for the role of governor in North Carolina. We have Representative Mike Collins here in Georgia 10. This was me, my final segment yesterday. Greg Bluestein reporting that Mike Collins drew bipartisan rebukes when he refused to delete a social media post that agreed with an account with a history of racist and anti-Semitic posts. The Jackson, Georgia Republican was condemned by figures from both parties Sunday when he seconded a social media post by an account that dubbed itself Garbage Human. Seems nice. That appeared to criticize a Washington Post reporter's Jewish heritage. All right, back to me here today. That is Representative Mike Collins, who is not backing down. He has decided the Donald Trump, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene wing of the GOP is one he's more comfortable with. And as long as he's in a safe and secure and gerrymandered district, as is Greene, they'll continue to be what represents the GOP in the Trump era. More Ron Show after this. By the way, you can follow The Ron Show on any of your preferred social media platforms, although I'll warn you, I haven't done much on Threads. I got to work on that. At Ron Show ATL, Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram. Yeah, follow us there and keep up. We post a show notes blog from each day's show, and I always share it, particularly on Facebook. I don't do that so much on Instagram, I can't on Instagram, obviously. Or on the Twitter X platform. But I'm very active on the Twitter X platform. I dive into dialogue and debate and back and forth. It's usually a fun it is for me anyway. I enjoy doing it. I don't know if it's fun to follow, but I'd like to think that it's a fun follow. So what for Nikki Haley now? Maybe she runs for Senate in 2026? Lindsey Graham is up, and here's the irony. Lindsey Graham, I lived in South Carolina for 11 years. Lindsey Graham, not really popular with Republicans in South Carolina. He's not. He never really has been. There's that undercurrent of rumor, speculation, personal life. I dare not really dive into that. But trust me, conservative voters hear it too. In fact, they speak of it a lot in closed circles. So does that make Nikki Haley viable as a Senate candidate in 2026? Could be interesting. But again, she would be taking on, from a traditional Republican perspective, a Trump acolyte. Does that make Lindsey Graham somehow popular with the electorate? I don't know. That could be an interesting, circle that date, 2026. Could Nikki Haley run for the GOP nomination to be the newest U.S. senator from South Carolina? Could maybe happen. I happen to think, though, that she, having been governor, seems to be more wired for a leadership role, an executive branch role. Obviously, the office of the presidency, and I'd like to think that she wanted to stick this out as long as she did, and as long as she had the Coke money to set herself up for 2028. But 2028 is going to be right there for a Ron DeSantis to step up if Donald Trump is not going to be viable enough to run again. And if he doesn't win this cycle, what would stop him from running again in 2028, right? I mean, other than age, we know age is a big deal to Republicans. Someone who is 81 years old, according to them, should not be running for president. And Donald Trump will be 81 years old in 4 years. All just fascinating to watch, and we'll speculate then and see how it all plays out. The Politically Georgia blog this morning in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wonders what happens to her voters, writing, she's attracted a mix of old guard Republicans, never Trumpers, independent voters, and disaffected Democrats. I happen to think that last part is probably just a very tiny sliver of this coalition. They write, however, it's a voting bloc that resembles the same quirky coalition that proved decisive in Georgia's last race. Remember the swing voters who cast ballots for both Republican Governor Brian Kemp and Democratic Senators Raphael Warnock in 2022, propelling the two incumbents to victory, they ask? The proverbial Kemp-Warnock voter could again play a pivotal role, and where they break on the likely Biden-Trump rematch in November could help decide another race, this one for President of the United States. Personally, I just keep wondering when the American voter who... I just keep wondering when the American voter who 70, 80% of say they do not want a Trump-Biden rematch comes to realize that, hey, these two parties aren't really giving us what we want. The way this is set up is not really working for what we, the people, want. It's a curious thing, right? And for the record, there's going to be apparently, well, if there's going to be a no labels candidate, it ain't going to be Joe Manchin. He decided he's not going to do it. By the way, speaking of independent senators, he's not independent, but as much as one could be, Kyrsten Sinema announcing that she's not going to be running for her seat. She's not a viable candidate. Polling showed that she wasn't really in a position to speak much from a point of view of winning that seat back anyway. So that's going to come down to a bipartisan race as well in the state of Arizona. The balance of the Senate, of course, teetering on the brink with Joe Manchin, of course, not running for his seat. No way Democrats can win that. The valid questions about whether Democrats can win an Arizona Senate seat, although we did win one just last cycle. By the way, I don't know if you saw this, but Joe Manchin was apparently speaking at Harvard and got confronted by some climate activists. I can't on the one hand giggle about this when you had the crazies at the Athens-Clarke County Mayor's press conference, just not even letting the man speak at his own press conference, giving some details of the city's reaction to the Lake and Riley murder. But Joe Manchin didn't like being yelled at to the point that he stood up and squared up like he was going to go punch this guy. And I mean, at Harvard, at Harvard, no less, Joe Manchin was about to get into fisticuffs with a protester. Okay. All right, Joe. West Virginia Metro News giving it to us a little bit like this. Last Friday, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin was delivering a talk to a small group at the Harvard Institute of Politics. His presentation was interrupted by a handful of radical climate activists. They got in his face, chanted and yelled at him for his support, among other things, of the Mountain Valley Pipeline. One protester got in Manchin's personal space and said, "You sold our futures and you got rich doing it, you sick f***." That's when Manchin stood up out of his chair. I mean, he's been heckled before, but in his face, stood up, squared up like he was about to come cold cock this guy. And depending on if you've watched the video, he either stopped himself or waited, paused just long enough so that someone else would stop him, to make the appearance. Okay, op-ed in the AJC talks about Biden's prospects in the state of Georgia from a Democratic representative's point of view, and it ain't good. That next.
Follow The Ron Show on Facebook at The Ron Show Radio. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
You ever go to a drive-thru and you think you had enough money for what it is you ordered? You get to the window and you just a few cents short and think you're going to have to cancel the order. And then you find in the crevices between the cushions of your seat or that spot where things fall through the seat and the console, you're like, oh, I found a quarter. I'm good. I got it. That seems to be what the Trump defense team's attorneys here in Georgia keep coming up with. Additional change. They just keep finding additional change. They have two more witnesses that they suddenly want to call to testify in the Fonnie Willis, Nathan Wade. Now let's include Terrence Bradley soap opera. We'll get to that in a little bit. First things first, I want to read a good bit of an opinion piece that a former Representative, Carolyn Bordeaux, from here in Georgia, wrote about the president's prospects for winning re-election in the state of Georgia. And I happen to agree with her. We're both from Georgia, after all. We are wired to know what Georgians think, what Georgia voters tend to do. The headline, I doubt Biden can win Georgia without a miracle in 2024. This filed just a few hours ago as an op-ed on the AJC. I'll share it in today's show notes, as I always do, at ronshowatl.com. As President Joe Biden plans to visit Georgia Saturday to shore up his coalition, people ask me if Democrats can win in Georgia this year. I shrug. Unlikely. But maybe with Donald Trump on the ballot, Democrats will be recipients of a miracle. Trump is a uniquely unqualified and polarizing candidate, but I can say with great certainty that Democrats will not win on their own merits. She's not wrong. A lot of Democrats, or a lot of folks who vote Democrat, liberals who walk amongst us here in Georgia, particularly Metro Atlanta, proudly rocking those Georgia's a blue state T-shirts and paraphernalia. We're not a blue state, y'all. We're not. We're a purpley red state that has benefited from uniquely terrible candidates the last few cycles. Herschel freaking Walker. Kelly Loeffler, not much better. The conservative fembot that she is, owned a WNBA team and wouldn't get one vote on the roster if they wanted to vote for her. Of course, Donald Trump in 2020. It's just a string of bad candidates lately. And when the GOP has good candidates or candidates that are more in line with their values, who at least fly right and give the appearance of being decent people, those folks win. Back to Bordeaux's piece. The Democratic Party of 2018 and 2020, the infrastructure of campaigns and advocacy groups, the passion that flipped Georgia's 6th and 7th congressional districts, 2 Senate seats, and the state for Biden have evaporated. Aided and abetted by Republicans, the Democrats' multi-ethnic and multi-racial coalition has fallen apart. We saw the results in the Democratic statewide losses in 2022. See? And the situation is much worse in 2024. The problem is that Georgia Democrats have to hold together a coalition across a racial fault line. Republicans exploit this, and Democrats, deeply invested in the project of social justice, play into their hands. Georgia Democrats managed to hold on to power up to 2004, longer than many other Democratic parties in the South that recentered politically around the Republican Party after the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. A Democratic Party of rural whites, the black community, and a progressive business community passed legislation in the 1990s for which Georgia is justly proud of, including lottery-funded pre-K, teacher pay raises, and the Hope Scholarship. This coalition started to fall apart in the 1990s for many reasons, but among the most bitter was that Republicans realized they could offer black Democrats a Faustian bargain. They could have more black minority opportunity districts, but the cost would be white Democratic legislative seats. The collusion was not a secret, Carolyn Bordeaux writes. During the 1990s redistricting, the Republican Party offered selected black Democrats assistance with drawing maps and bringing redistricting plans before the U.S. Department of Justice. Under orders from the DOJ to draw more minority opportunity districts, the Georgia congressional delegation went from 8 white Democrats, 1 black Democrat, and 1 white Republican, to 3 black Democrats and 8 white Republicans. Many black leaders recognized the danger and struggled to hold the coalition together. But by 2004, the Georgia General Assembly had flipped and Republicans took power largely at the expense of white Democrats. The problem for the Democratic Party then and now is that they pursue strategies to elevate black representation and black power, but at the expense of their own coalition. And Georgia Republicans leverage this to devastating effect. We just saw this in the last redistricting bout. As a member of Congress in 2021, and by the way, that's me reacting to what she's saying here. Back to her piece. As a member of Congress in 2021, I recall meeting with the staff from former Attorney General Eric Holder's group, All on the Line. They were spearheading Democrats' legal efforts around redistricting. The attorneys on his staff were explicit about their goals in Georgia. Our job is to maximize black voting power. As the only white Democratic congressional representative in the Deep South, I knew this was a trap, but I couldn't find a way out. Democrats would maximize black voting power, most likely by litigating to form more minority opportunity districts. Republicans would maximize Republican voting power. Do you see the distinction she's making there? My district was then drawn to increase the black population as a minority coalition district, and Lucy McBath, a popular black woman, left her district to run against me when her district was drawn to be more Republican. Perhaps foolishly, I felt compelled to try to stop her because I knew that the diverse but moderate suburban voter that I had worked so hard to bring into the Democratic fold held the keys to the coalition that could achieve political and policy goals. But the appeal of a sympathetic black woman who might lose a congressional seat in the South was impossible for Democrats locally and nationally to resist. I understand, Carolyn Bordeaux writes, but once again, Democrats maximize black representation, not by defeating Republicans, but by taking out one of their own. We are deep into an op-ed, by the way, where this headline talks about Biden's chances in the state of Georgia, and yet Carolyn Bordeaux is still grinding an axe a little more personal. All right, we'll go back to this. Earlier this year, Georgia just finished another round of redistricting, as I just said minutes ago, right? After Democratic-backed organizations brought litigation on the claim that Republicans had improperly diluted black voting power. The Republicans complied with a wink. They conceded more black opportunity district, but erased the minority coalition district of the 7th in favor of a black opportunity district, combined 6 white majority Democratic state House districts into 3, and made 2 other majority white Democratic Senate districts into majority black districts. Bordeaux writes, maybe Democrats will pick up a district or 2 in the General Assembly. But now that the paired incumbents have sorted things out, most likely next year there will be only 3 white male Democrats remaining in the state legislature. Again, we have waded well deep into this Bordeaux opinion piece that is supposed to be speaking of Joe Biden's opportunity in 2024 here in the state of Georgia, and we've yet to get there. It feels like Bordeaux is unhappy with the Democratic Party. Hey, join the club. I just think we're arguing from, well, I don't know. I think she's making some valid points here as well. Back to her. I'd like to think it doesn't matter, but it does, because it's part of a series of ongoing signals from the Democratic Party that the diverse but plurality white, moderate suburban voters are not important to their coalition. Stacey Abrams' nearly successful strategy in 2018 focused heavily on turning out minority voters, but she also capitalized on the moderate suburban voters disillusioned by Trump in 2020. Democrats were able to realize the potential of this fragile coalition to flip the state, and I was the only Democrat in the country to flip a Republican-held congressional seat. But then the Democratic leadership never acknowledged or realized the importance of these swing voters and made no investment in either listening to their concerns or political outreach in 2018. The doors in my suburban neighborhood bristled with Democratic door hangers. By 2022, my neighborhood was only canvassed once by Republicans. Ironically, Bordeaux writes, Democrats are now even losing black voters who are furious the Democratic Party has failed to deliver on important issues like police reform, Medicaid expansion, and voting rights. Yet black representation is at a historic high, and progressive groups have poured millions into organizations devoted to minority registration and turnout. I understand the history. This is very important, she writes. But Democrats also need to recognize they have turned their backs on a critical constituency that could deliver real political and policy victory. And to win again in Georgia, they're going to have to find a way to win them back. Y'all, that's the piece. That's the entire piece. Where's the Biden part? It's in the headline. I see that. Let me go back. Did I miss it? Did I skip a paragraph? I don't think I did. She talked a lot about her district and Lucy Macbeth and going for black opportunity districts. Just the first paragraph. That's the only time she mentions the presidential race. Yikes. What a misleading headline. I mean, it snared me. Yeah, I'm reeled in. I'm flopping in the cooler in the boat. I'm reading this to you. I'm sitting here opining on it, thinking this will give us some insight into Joe Biden's chances at winning in 2024 in the state of Georgia. And she barely mentioned it, but she sure enough covered her issues as a former representative and candidate. And again, made some valid points. We saw this play out where Republicans played Democrats a little bit in the redistricting game and came away all the better. Well, nonetheless, she does speak to not just the state, but the national framework of the Democratic Party in a way that is difficult to explain. I speak to people all the time in my personal life who get disenfranchised or disappointed with the outcomes when Democrats take control of a chamber or the White House or both. Why can't they get the things done that they say they want to get done? It's as Bordeaux opined, a fragile coalition of folks who come together to defeat a common enemy, but who may not always have common causes. I mean, look at the disdain right now within folks who are, you would expect voting blocks that are the type that you would think that an incumbent president with a solid economy and low unemployment would be popular with. The African-American vote does seem to have some softness to it for the incumbent Democratic president that you would think is unexpected, particularly with an African-American running mate at vice president in Kamala Harris. There is, of course, the Arab-American vote that is imperiled by the Israel-Gaza struggle, the calls for ceasefire that have been largely ignored by President Biden. Recently, Kamala Harris, I think she did call for a ceasefire, and there are negotiations ongoing, and I think the president had mentioned he expected one as of last Monday, which, of course, has not come to fruition. The Latin American voter, there has been softness in that coalition. And so it's, for me, all those reasons. Bordeaux did not really cover why she doesn't think Joe Biden can win Georgia in 2024, aside from the headline telling us that it would take a miracle. She didn't really cover as to why. I think it's for all of those reasons. And for, again, a reason that I pointed out here within the last week or so. I think a lot of that never Trump coalition, the disaffected Republican vote, the part of Nikki Haley's voting base, you may have some who are going to stay home, but I think a lot of them are going to come home because at the end of the day, they are Republicans. They are more aligned to their party, I believe, than their country. And I think you're going to have enough of them who are going to show up in states like Arizona and Georgia, which, again, they're not purple states, they're purpley red states. I think they're going to show up in enough numbers that it's going to make a difference in the outcomes of those two states, which is why we have to look to the Pennsylvanias and the Michigans and the Wisconsins. Even Wisconsin is not really all that different than Georgia and Arizona. It's a bluish, purpley, leany, sometimes kind of red. Scott Walker was the governor of Wisconsin not all that long ago. Remember him? Ugh. So it's because of the softness, a lot of those coalitions that I spoke about who are reliably Democratic voters and the Never Trump movement that I think is sort of just kind of surrendering. I think there are a lot more than
11,780 votes.
Yeah, 11,780 votes to make up the difference. And I understand the demography of the state, continually changes, that folks are moving in from other parts of the country, and they may be a little more blue than Georgia's voting bloc has been, I'd say, prior to 2010. But I don't know that it's closed the gap just yet. Stacey Abrams ran as a competent candidate against another competent candidate in 2022. And how many votes did she fall short by?
11,780 votes.
No, it was 298,857 votes. Nearly 300,000 votes short. She lost by 7.5 percentage points in 2022. That's not close. If I were a betting man, and I'm not, I'd say Donald Trump wins Georgia. God, as demonstrably terrible a candidate as he is, with all of his baggage, I think he still wins the state of Georgia right now by somewhere between 1 and 7 percentage points. And I know that's a big wide swath to guesstimate in, but that's where he is. All right, so we're in the home stretch here for Wednesday. Thank you for listening, by the way. Replay 5 to 6 p.m. on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com. We air first weekdays, 9 to 10 a.m., and then we podcast. We'll have a weekend edition appearing soon on Progressive Voices Network. You can listen on demand if you'd like to at progressivevoices.com. Thank you. However you listen, we appreciate that. So if there's one thing, and I'm loath to give Elon Musk credit for much of anything, I do happen to like the community notes feature where someone can tweet something absolutely just false, crazy, nuts, and the community notes will correct it. I don't think that applies to Elon Musk's own tweets, however. He retweets Colin Rugg, where Colin had tweeted on March 5th that there was a report that Joe Biden has secretly flown 320,000 illegal immigrants from Latin American airports to 43 U.S. cities and calls it treason. Elon Musk shared that 24 hours ago, if you're listening first in the 9 to 10 a.m. hour. Tweeted this a day ago. Treason indeed. Ushering in vast numbers of illegals is why Secretary Mayorkas was impeached by the House. They are importing voters. You can't vote until you become a U.S. citizen. This is why groups on the far left fight so hard to stop voter ID requirements under the absurd guise, did he spell that right, of protecting the right to vote. Judd Legum, by the way, I don't know if you follow Judd, at Judd, Juddlegum. He tweets, Elon Musk told his 175 million followers on his platform, this platform, but it is his, that Biden committed treason by secretly chartering flights to bring 320,000 illegal immigrants to the United States. Judd tweets, let's be clear, everything about the claim is a brazen lie. Follow along for the receipts. Musk is referring to a parole program for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. This is not a secret. Biden announced in a speech on January 5th, 2023, it was covered extensively in the media. It was promoted in press releases. It is featured now on the USCIS homepage. Further, Biden is not chartering any flights. Individuals are buying their own tickets on commercial flights. If the beneficiary has been authorized to travel to the United States, they must arrange and fund their own travel, the USCIS website states. Judd further writing in a blog at popular.info, the reason why no one noticed all the planes chartered by the Biden administration is that they don't exist. Under the terms of the parole program, individuals are required to purchase their own flights to the United States. While Musk says this program constitutes treason, it is fully within Biden's legal authority. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security can, quote, in his discretion, parole into the United States temporarily, that doesn't mean voters, under such conditions as he may prescribe only on a case-by-case basis for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit any alien applying for admission to the United States. Federal courts have found that parole determinations are not subject to judicial review. Every president has used parole authority since it was established in 1952, except for Donald Trump. I just want to circle back to the irony that the app that Elon Musk owns, the X Twitter platform, that now features the one thing that I do actually like about the platform, the community notes, where folks can counter back with some substantiation, some proof, as Judd Legum has done, even within his thread, Elon's own thread. Eventually, the community notes appear underneath the tweet to clarify or to construe the misconstrued tweet in the first place. But it seems to be disabled for the owner of the Twitter X platform's own personal account because there's no clarification there whatsoever. All right, I said I was going to talk about this story, and I guess I will. I've only got 3 minutes left. But are we all tired yet of the Fani Willis, Nathan Wade, Terrence Bradley kerfuffle? Trump's defense attorney team have identified potential new witnesses in the Fulton district attorney removal fight, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Remember, we are awaiting now, I think we're a week and a half left before Judge Scott McAfee is to give his determination about whether or not Fani Willis and or Nathan Wade should be disqualified from the case, which could set the Trump election interference case in Georgia back by a minimum of 18 months. Tamar Hollerman, Bill Rankin writing, defendants in the Fulton County election interference case say they've got 2 new witnesses who can raise additional questions about whether Nathan Wade's law partner was truthful when he testified last month about the special prosecutor's romantic relationship with District Attorney Fani Willis. Both of the potential witnesses are attorneys who say they spoke separately, so hearsay, with Terrence Bradley last fall. The defense said Cindy Lee Yeager and Manny Aurora can testify that Bradley told them that Wade and Willis were romantically involved in 2019 and 2020, far earlier than the former couple testified to in court. Okay, but seriously, don't you think, if anything, maybe that has bearing on whether or not Terrence Bradley should continue to practice law in the state of Georgia? And hasn't Judge McAfee honestly seen and heard enough? And since conflict of interest is at the heart of this, can we not just point out that, here's what the AJC writes, Yeager is a co-chief deputy DA in Cobb County. Aurora is a defense attorney who represents Kenneth Chesborough, a defendant in the election case who struck a plea deal with prosecutors in October. Gee, nothing stand to be gained there. A spokesman for the Fulton DA's office said, quote, in keeping with ethical rules, we can only respond in a filing with the court, which we intend to do. Further down in Tamar and Bill's piece, it's unclear whether Yeager and Aurora's testimony, which at this point is unsworn, will be admitted into evidence. At a hearing on Friday, Fulton Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee said he was done hearing evidence on the matter and indicated he would make a decision within the next 2 weeks. The defense attorneys are asking the judge to reopen the case, delay, to include Yeager and Aurora's testimony. Okay, now here's an important line in this piece as well. The court filings do not mention any first-hand knowledge Yeager or Aurora had about Willis and Wade's relationship. Instead, they recount what they were told by Bradley, hearsay, Wade's former law partner and divorce attorney. Yeah, I mean, this is salacious a headline. It exhausts us, but I really don't think that's going to go anywhere. Neither is the rest of this show because I'm done. You hear the music. All right, we get the replay 5 to 6 p.m. on the America One radio app, and then we go to podcast. Thank you for doing that if you do podcast. We air weekdays 9 to 10 a.m. on the America One radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, and have full show notes, a lot on today, at RonShowATL.com. Have yourselves a good one.